never thought I'd actually write about what happened at that motel, but the more time passes, the more I feel like staying quiet about it would almost be irresponsible. People use reviews to decide where to sleep, which places to trust, who to give their money and safety to. What I experienced wasn't supernatural or dramatic in a movie sense, but it was the kind of thing that makes your skin crawl long after you leave. The kind of thing that makes you triple-check locks in every hotel room after. And the worst part is, none of it would ever show up in the pictures or the description. It started on a long road trip I was taking alone. Nothing special, just a week off, driving across towns I'd never been to before, making stops wherever I felt like. The freedom was nice, and the long quiet roads were relaxing at first. But by the fifth night, I was worn out. My shoulders hurt from driving, my eyes felt heavy, and the daylight started fading faster than I expected. I hadn't booked anything ahead of time, so I just looked up the closest cheap place to stop for the night. It was a roadside motel. Simple, old, 2 floors, long balcony running across the second level. The kind you see in movies. I didn't think much of it. I just wanted a bed and a locked door. I pulled in as the sun was dropping behind some trees. The parking lot was cracked and uneven, with only a few scattered cars. The building itself looked tired, like it had been standing there for decades without much love. Still, I didn't feel anything wrong at first. It was just another cheap motel on a worn-down road. When I checked in, the lobby was empty except for one employee sitting behind a counter. He looked like someone who had been there for far too many hours. His expression was blank, almost bored. Nothing strange, nothing alarming. Just someone doing their job in a quiet place. I got my key, walked up the stairs, and found my room. Inside, the room smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals mixed with something older, something stale. The carpet had dark patches that never came out, the furniture was mismatched, and the air felt thick and stuffy. But I was exhausted, and I told myself to stop being picky. I tossed my bag on the chair, locked the door, and went to wash up. It was when I returned that I noticed the first strange thing. The curtain, which I had left shut when I entered the bathroom, was now open a few inches. Just enough for someone to peek inside from outside if they wanted to. I froze for a moment, staring at the thin gap. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that maybe the breeze from the bathroom vent caused it. But the window wasn't open, and the air wasn't moving. I closed it again, pulled it tight, and brushed it off. I was tired. My mind was probably slipping. I settled onto the bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to unwind. But the feeling didn't go away. That sense that something was off became this little knot in my stomach. After a while, I finally turned off the light and lay down. The room was quiet, too quiet. I expected to hear cars from the road, maybe people talking outside, but everything was silent. The only sound was the hum of the old air unit. I must have drifted into this light, uneasy sleep, because the next thing I remember was waking up to the faint sound of footsteps outside my door. Slow, steady, measured. Not someone walking past. Someone standing there, pausing, shifting their weight. My heart started pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I didn't move. I didn't breathe loudly. I just lay there, staring into the dark, listening. The footsteps stayed outside my door far longer than any normal person would stand there. I could picture someone just on the other side, trying to hear inside the room, trying to sense movement, trying to figure something out. After maybe a full minute, the steps moved on. But they didn't go far. They stopped in front of the next room, and stayed. And then the next. It wasn't someone going to their room. It was someone checking each one. The fear that crawled through my chest in that moment was slow and cold. The kind that spreads in your body bit by bit, making your hands shake. It wasn't the idea of ghosts or anything supernatural. It was the realization that a real person was quietly inspecting rooms in the middle of the night. Someone with access to all of us. Someone who knew who was traveling alone. I lay awake for hours after that, staring at the ceiling, jumping at every small sound. I kept telling myself I was being dramatic, that maybe someone was looking for a friend. Maybe someone was lost, or drunk, or confused. But the longer I stayed in that bed, the more I felt watched. Not through the window, not through a hole, not directly, but watched in the sense that my presence there mattered to someone in the building. The kind of attention that feels wrong and heavy, the kind that's not curiosity but intention. At some point, exhaustion won again, and I fell asleep. I woke up to the light coming through the thin curtains. Morning always makes things feel safer, but the memory of the night sat heavy in my chest. I didn't want to stay a second longer. When I stepped outside with my bag, something new made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The doors of multiple rooms, at least 8 that I counted, had muddy footprints right in front of them. Not scattered randomly, but centered, paused, like someone had stood there long enough for the dirt to mark the concrete. The prints in front of my door were the deepest. That confirmed everything I feared. When I returned my key, I glanced at the employee. He looked tired again, uninterested, but something about him made my stomach twist. I kept thinking back to the night before. The footsteps, the curtains disturbed, the silence of the whole place. The way the lobby light stayed on all night, illuminating absolutely nothing. I didn't say anything, I just left. I drove for hours with this uneasy feeling lingering in my body. The whole experience kept replaying in my head. If someone was checking rooms, why? What were they looking for? Who were they trying to assess? Were they seeing who was alone? Who didn't double lock their doors? Who was easy to enter? By the time I reached the next town, the fear had turned into something else, a kind of responsibility. I kept thinking about anyone else who might stay there, anyone traveling alone, tired, trusting the pictures online, anyone who wouldn't check their curtains or listen for footsteps, anyone who wouldn't think twice about a quiet motel on a quiet road. I realized this wasn't something you just forget. It wasn't an oh well, weird night type of thing. It was the sort of experience that lingers in your mind and follows you, changing how you behave forever. And it was the kind of thing that people needed warnings about. The kind of thing that doesn't show up in glossy booking photos. It wasn't dramatic enough for police. No crime happened. No one broke in. Nothing was stolen. But the behavior was wrong in a way that felt dangerous. Like someone was testing boundaries, observing patterns, checking vulnerability. And that's when I understood. Some dangers don't make noise. They don't break doors or leave obvious signs. They move quietly in the dark, listening at doors, waiting for the right moment, hoping no one notices until it's too late. That's why, for the first time in my life, I wrote a detailed review. I didn't name anyone. I didn't accuse anyone. I just described exactly what I experienced and why I would never return. I didn't write it for drama or attention. I wrote it so the next person, especially someone traveling alone, would choose somewhere else. Somewhere safer. Somewhere with normal behavior and normal nights. Because real danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just slow footsteps outside your door, in a place where you're supposed to feel safe. And that's reason enough to warn others. I've stayed in a lot of motels over the years, usually because they're cheap and easy, and most of the time nothing strange happens. But there was one place I stayed in that still comes back to me sometimes at night, especially when I'm in a room with thin walls or flickering lights. It wasn't the dirtiest place I'd ever stayed in, and it wasn't even in a bad part of town. From the outside, it looked completely normal. But what happened inside felt so real and so close to danger that it changed the way I see small motels forever. I was driving cross-country alone, trying to reach my destination in 2 days. The first day went fine until the sun started dipping behind the trees and my eyes began to burn from the headlights on the highway. I didn't want to push my luck by driving while tired, so I took the first exit I saw with a sign that said, "Motel Vacancy." The road leading to it was dark, with nothing but tall grass and old trees on either side. The motel appeared out of nowhere, sitting alone like it had been forgotten by time. The sign flickered a bit, but the building looked normal enough. 2 floors, parking right in front, a vending machine that buzzed loudly, and a check-in office that smelled like old carpet and stale air. I was too tired to care about anything. I just wanted a bed. I got a room on the first floor, near the end of the hallway. The room number was hanging crooked on the door, but at that point, I didn't care. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room felt colder than the hallway. The air smelled faintly like cleaning spray mixed with something older, something damp. The carpet was dark and worn, and when I dropped my bag on it, a small cloud of dust puffed up. The bedspread had a weird pattern on it that looked like it had been washed 1,000 times. The bathroom light flickered once before it finally stayed on. But everything looked normal enough for a cheap place. I didn't expect much. I turned on the heater because the room felt strangely cold, even though it was warm outside. The heater made a rattling noise like something was stuck inside the vents, but eventually it blew warm air and I felt myself start to relax. I ate something small from my bag, took a shower, and then lay down on the bed. I stared at the ceiling for a while, noticing small brownish stains scattered near the corner. I told myself it was just water damage. Everything in that room felt old and tired, just like the rest of the motel, just like me. But as the night slowly settled in, I started hearing strange sounds. At first, it was nothing alarming, just the usual noises old buildings make. Pipes expanding, wind pushing at the windows, the heater clunking now and then. But after a while, I heard something that made me sit up. It was a soft dragging sound above me, like someone moving something heavy across the floor upstairs. But my room was at the far end of the building. When I checked earlier, I noticed there was no second floor above that part of the motel. The hallway above me ended 2 doors down from my room. My ceiling should have been roof, not another room. I tried to ignore it. I told myself maybe I miscounted. But then I heard it again, slow, steady dragging. Something heavy scraping across the floor. Then a thud. Then another. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't random either. It sounded like someone deliberately pulling something across the ground over and over, stopping, then doing it again. It bothered me enough that I turned off the heater, thinking maybe it was the vents making the noise. But when the heater went silent, the dragging became clearer. It wasn't the heater. It wasn't the pipes. It wasn't the wind. It was something physical. My room felt colder now, not from the air, just from the feeling that I wasn't supposed to hear whatever was happening up there. I lay back down, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard another sound. Something like footsteps, slow and uneven, like someone limping. Then silence. Then more dragging. At one point, I heard something metallic hit the floor above me and roll a short distance before stopping. The sound echoed through the ceiling in a way that made my chest tighten. I kept reminding myself that it was an old building. Old buildings make weird noises, but deep down I knew these noises weren't random. They sounded like someone was doing something, moving something, right above me in a space that shouldn't have existed. I tried not to think about it, but the noises didn't stop. After a while, they grew even stranger. I heard a dull thumping, not loud but steady, like something hitting the floor rhythmically. Not fast, not slow, just steady thumps, spaced out by a few seconds. It wasn't like footsteps. It was too heavy and too controlled for that. It was like someone dropping something weighty again and again. My stomach tightened. Every instinct in me told me something wasn't right. I thought about leaving, but it was late, and I didn't want to wander around in the dark. I told myself to at least try to sleep. At some point, maybe around midnight, the noises stopped. All at once. The silence was almost worse. It made me more aware of how alone I was in that room, how thin the walls felt, and how the cold air seemed to press against my skin. I think I fell asleep for maybe an hour, but something woke me up. A low sound, almost like a dull vibration. I opened my eyes, confused, and then realized it was coming from the wall behind the bed. A faint buzzing like machinery, but the motel didn't seem modern enough to have anything mechanical running through the walls. The buzzing stopped suddenly, then turned into a soft tapping from inside the wall. Not outside, not above, inside. It was slow at first, then grew faster, as if something was hitting the inside of the wall again and again. I sat up slowly, staring at the wall like it might move. The tapping turned into thudding, like someone trying to push through or break something loose. The wall shook slightly, just enough for me to see the frame of a picture rattling. My whole body froze. I didn't understand what was happening. There was no reason for anyone to be inside the wall. But the thudding didn't stop. It went on for what felt like minutes before going dead silent again. I stayed awake after that, sitting upright, listening to the building breathe and shift. I didn't turn the heater back on. The room felt too still, too alert, like it was waiting for something. I didn't move until the first hints of sunlight touched the curtains. That soft orange glow made me feel just barely brave enough to stand up and grab my things. Before leaving, I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before. On the baseboard near the wall where the tapping came from, the paint was chipped in a small spot, and there was a faint line of dust, like the wall had been disturbed recently. It wasn't a big detail, but it was enough to make my heart drop. I walked out of that room without looking back. When I reached the parking lot, I saw something else I hadn't noticed the night before. Behind the building, there was a small, locked maintenance shed with a large metal bin next to it. The bin had a dark stain on one corner and looked newer than everything else around it. The shed door had scratches near the bottom, like it had been forced open before and then repaired in a rush. I didn't want to know more. I didn't want to think about the noises above me, the tapping inside the wall, or the dragging. I just got in my car and drove away, faster than I normally would. Later that day, at a gas station a few towns over, I searched the motel online out of curiosity. I didn't find anything about crimes or incidents, but I did find one detail that made my stomach twist. The motel used to have 28 rooms, but the current listing said 27. One room had been permanently closed due to structural issues. The closed room number was right above mine. I realized then that the noises I heard weren't just old building sounds. Someone had been in that closed-off space. Someone had been dragging something heavy and hitting the floors. And whatever was happening inside the wall near my bed wasn't random either. That room had a history the motel didn't share, and the space above me wasn't empty like it should have been. The ending is simple. Nothing dramatic happened to me. I left in one piece, but the thought that someone was in that sealed-off room, doing something loud enough for me to hear through solid walls, still sticks with me. Someone was above me in a place that wasn't supposed to be used. Someone behind the wall was trying to move or get out or get something unstuck. I'll never know what they were doing. I'm not even sure I want to, because the most unsettling thought isn't what I heard. It's how close I was to a room the motel tried to pretend didn't exist anymore, and how thin the walls were between me and whatever they kept hidden inside it. I still think about that trip to the Isle of Skye more often than I care to admit. It was supposed to be one of those peaceful escapes. Fresh air, open land, long hikes, quiet nights. I had been excited about the whole thing. I had romantic ideas in my head of misty hills, old stone paths, and small warm B&Bs with kind owners who treated guests like family. That's what I expected. What we got was something else entirely. We booked a small B&B outside Portree. It looked perfect online. Clean rooms, home-cooked breakfast, friendly couple running it. The pictures almost had this old charm to them. Handmade quilts, wooden dressers, fresh flowers on the nightstands. After a long day of traveling and walking, it sounded comforting. When we arrived, the building looked exactly like the photos. That was the strange part. Usually when something feels off, it's because the photos lied. But here, everything matched. The neat rooms, the polished floors, even the smell of lavender coming from the hallway. It looked perfect, too perfect, honestly. Like it wanted to be perfect in a forced, stiff kind of way. The first thing I noticed inside the room was the signs. They were everywhere. Little printed sheets on the dresser, the table, the window, the bathroom door. All worded in this scolding tone. Do not touch. On the quilt, do not fold. On the window latch, please do not open. On the wardrobe, guests are not to access this. Everywhere I turned, there was something telling me what not to do. The room itself was beautiful. Hand-stitched blankets, framed photos, old wooden furniture. But the signs made everything feel like a museum instead of a place to rest. I tried to brush it off. Maybe they had issues with past guests. Maybe they were just protective of the decorations. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. But things only got stranger. To use the shower, we had to ask permission. Not just once, you couldn't simply walk into the bathroom and turn it on. You had to go downstairs, ask the couple, and then wait while they prepared something in the laundry room. It was embarrassing, standing there like a child who needed supervision. The woman would nod slowly, give this tight smile, and tell us when we could go back upstairs. We never understood why. The water pressure wasn't unusual. The heater worked. Everything seemed normal except for the rules. The internet was even more controlling. It shut off at 11 p.m. exactly. Not slow, not spotty, completely gone. And not just for guests, the router was physically turned off. We'd hear the click from downstairs every night. The husband did it like it was part of some ritual. I remember lying in the bed that first night, listening to the wind and thinking about how quiet the whole building felt. Too quiet. The kind of quiet where every small sound echoed. Around midnight, just when I was starting to drift off, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft, slow, deliberate steps. They stopped outside our door for a few seconds. Not passing by, not heading anywhere, just stopping. I held my breath. Then the steps moved again, down the hall, stopping at another door, pausing, then moving again. It wasn't the sound of someone going somewhere. It was the sound of someone checking. We found out quickly that the woman would walk the halls at night to make sure everyone was sleeping. That's how she phrased it earlier when she welcomed us, and I thought she was joking. But hearing her pacing around after midnight, when the whole house should have been silent, made it sink in that she really meant it. She wanted control. She wanted obedience, and she was checking for it. I tried to ignore it, but every night we heard the same routine. The slow steps, the stopping, the faint sound of her leaning near doors, like she was listening for movement. It made sleep impossible. I felt trapped, like being watched in your own room. By the second day, I started noticing how the other travelers looked. No one looked relaxed. No one looked comfortable. People ate breakfast in tight, awkward silence, sitting straight, not touching anything they weren't supposed to. I remember one couple whispering to each other with their eyes wide, glancing toward the kitchen every few seconds. Another guest, an older man, looked pale and exhausted, like he hadn't slept at all. It was clear we weren't the only ones who felt something wrong. I realized it even more when one traveler didn't come down for breakfast. The woman told us loudly that he had been kicked out. Checkout time is 10 a.m. sharp. She had written on the signs and repeated when we arrived. But this man had only been a little late. His taxi hadn't come yet. But she still pushed him outside into the storm, wouldn't even let him stand inside the hallway to stay dry. He had to wait on the doorstep while rain poured down in sheets. I saw him through the window, drenched, cold, looking around helplessly while she kept the door locked behind him. Another guest had to walk to a shop miles away just to cash a check to pay for the room. When they got back, the couple had taken their bags and refused to return them until the payment was done. We didn't see the argument, but we saw the look on the traveler's face afterward. Shaken, angry, humiliated. It was like being in some kind of strict boarding house where the owners enjoyed punishing everyone for the smallest mistakes. Every rule came with consequences, but the worst moment was checkout day. We had packed early and just wanted to leave without trouble. When the woman came upstairs, she didn't knock softly. She flung the door open before we even had a chance to greet her and walked straight in like she owned the space, like it was her room, not ours. She sniffed the air dramatically, then said we stunk. It didn't even make sense. We had barely used the room except for sleeping, and we cleaned up before leaving. But she opened the window wide, stuck her head out, and made a show of waving her hand like she was clearing out terrible smells. The whole thing felt like a scene she'd done before. I noticed the way she eyed our bags, as if checking if we had taken something or broken a rule she could charge us for. She demanded payment immediately, standing there with her arms crossed like she expected us to argue. We didn't. We just wanted out. When we finally dragged our bags downstairs, the front door opened behind us and the car waiting outside, she suddenly switched moods. Her tone went bright and cheerful. She asked if we enjoyed our stay. She said it like she hadn't insulted us minutes earlier, like she hadn't paced the hallway at night or forced guests into storms or taken people's belongings hostage, like everything was perfectly normal. We knew the right thing was to just nod and leave, so we did. But the moment the car pulled away and the B&B disappeared behind the hill, I felt my whole body relax in a way I hadn't felt since arriving. It was like all the tension drained out at once. Later, I looked up the place on TripAdvisor. The ownership had changed since then, replaced by a much kinder couple. The old reviews, the awful ones, lined up exactly with everything we experienced. People wrote about her checking rooms at night, shutting off the internet, forcing people outside in storms, controlling every little thing. One review even mentioned the signs. All of them. Seeing it written by strangers made it feel real in a way that was worse than I expected. It meant it wasn't just us. It meant dozens of people had walked into that same strange, controlled environment and felt the same cold fear under the surface. There was nothing supernatural about it. No ghosts, no strange shadows. Just one controlling woman and a husband who followed every rule she created. People like that don't need anything magical to make their presence frightening. It's the way they take over your space, your movement, your privacy. The way they slip into the hallway at night, silent and slow, to make sure you're doing exactly what they expect. The way they smile wide while demanding obedience. I never forgot that feeling, the feeling of being a guest, but also a prisoner, in a beautiful room you weren't allowed to touch. And I've never trusted a quiet little B&B with local charm ever again. Some places don't need ghosts to be terrifying. Sometimes real people are enough. I had been awake for so long that my body felt like it was floating above the ground. 5 full days of work events, meetings, flights, late nights, early mornings. I added it up on the plane and realized I'd slept maybe 10 hours total across that whole stretch. By the time I landed in this small foreign town, my hands were shaking from pure exhaustion. My head felt heavy, like it was pulling my whole body down. I didn't care where I stayed. I didn't care what the room looked like. I just needed a bed, darkness, and silence. That was it. When I got to the motel, it looked worse than the pictures. Old neon sign buzzing in the wind, paint peeling off the doors, a parking lot so empty it made the whole place feel abandoned. But I didn't even pause. I checked in half awake, signed whatever papers they slid toward me, and dragged my bag to the second floor. The hallway smelled like stale water and old carpet. The lights buzzed overhead and flickered every few seconds. I was so tired I didn't even have the energy to feel uneasy. I just wanted horizontal sleep. When I opened the room door, a wave of damp air hit my face. The carpet felt wet under my shoes. The blankets were cold and moist, the kind of dampness you get from humidity sitting in a closed room for days. Should have bothered me. It really should have. But I was past the point of caring. My eyes burned every time I blinked. I dropped my bag next to the bed without even unzipping it. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check the bathroom. I didn't even look around. I just took off my shoes, locked the door, slid the extra latch chain across automatically. Something I always do even when I travel in nice places, and I let myself fall onto the bed fully dressed. The pillow smelled like a mix of bleach and something musty, but it didn't matter. I was asleep within minutes. I don't remember closing my eyes. Felt like they closed on their own. It was dark outside when I woke up. For a moment I didn't know where I was or what time it was. I reached for my phone but only saw a blurry glow. My hands were numb from how I had been lying. I finally managed to focus on the screen. It said 11:04 p.m. I had been asleep for only 3 hours, but it felt like days. The ringing didn't even register at first. I thought it was in my dream. Then I realized it was the phone on the nightstand. The old, beige motel phone that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. I sat up, confused, because no one should be calling me. No one knew I was here except the front desk. My chest felt tight from how abruptly I had woken up. I forced myself to answer. I picked up the phone, still half asleep. They said there had been a noise complaint. For a second, I thought they meant another room and were just calling everyone. But no, they said it was my room. My room specifically. I remember thinking that made no sense. I had been dead asleep since 8 p.m. I hadn't even moved. There was nothing loud happening. The whole building sounded silent when I came in. I told them I had been sleeping. That's it. Just sleeping. Then they asked if maybe someone else in the room was making noise. That sentence cut through the fog in my brain a little. Someone else? Who? I told them I was alone. Completely alone. I had checked in alone, walked to the room alone, locked the door alone. They paused, and then asked me again if I was sure I was by myself. That's when something cold slid down my spine. Something about the way they asked felt wrong. Like they weren't questioning the noise, they were questioning who was in the room with me. The tone wasn't annoyed or confused. It was slow, careful, like they wanted to confirm something. But I was so tired that after the call ended, my brain barely had the energy to hold on to the fear. I fell back onto the bed and passed out almost instantly. The phone was still in my hand when I drifted off again. The next time I woke up, sunlight was leaking through the edges of the curtains. My mouth was dry and my neck was stiff. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. Typical travel exhaustion, cramped motel bed, the usual. Then the memory of the call slid back into my head, piece by piece. The noise complaint, the slow questions, the way they asked if I was sure I was by myself. The more awake I became, the weirder it felt. There had been no noise, not even footsteps in the hallway, no doors slamming, nothing. The building felt empty when I arrived, and it sounded empty now. Why would someone complain about my room out of every room here? Why would the staff need multiple confirmations about me being alone? I sat there on the edge of the bed, trying to replay the details. The room was tiny. There wasn't even space for someone else to hide unless it was the closet or the bathroom. My brain suddenly imagined waking up and finding someone standing in the dark corner. I got this heavy, sick feeling in my stomach. I got up and checked the closet. Nothing. Checked the bathroom. Nothing. The door was still latched, the chain lock still tight. Everything looked the same as the night before. Still, something felt wrong. I went down to the office because I wanted to ask why they had called. Maybe someone next door complained and they dialed the wrong room. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. The lobby was small and stuffy, and the man at the desk barely looked up when I walked in. I asked him about the call. He frowned, like he didn't understand. Then he said they hadn't called me last night. Not even once. There had been no noise complaints at all. I remember staring at him, waiting for him to laugh or correct himself, but he didn't. He just repeated it. No call, no complaint. No one from the motel dialed any room after 9 p.m. That was the moment everything inside me tightened. My arms, my chest, my throat. It felt like something invisible had grabbed hold of me and wouldn't let go. I realized someone else had called me. Someone else who had access to the phone system. Someone who knew which rooms were occupied and wanted to confirm who was inside each one. Someone who wanted to know if I was alone. The latch chain on my door flashed in my mind. That thin strip of metal was the only thing that had stopped whoever it was from coming into the room while I slept like a dead body. It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't anything supernatural. It was something far simpler and far more terrifying. A real person inside or connected to the motel, checking rooms to find the ones with only one guest, calling each one, maybe walking the hallways, maybe listening through doors. I didn't waste a second. I went back to my room, grabbed my bag without even packing properly, and left. My legs were shaking as I walked down the hallway, and I kept looking behind me every few steps. I couldn't stop imagining someone watching from a cracked door, waiting for night to come again. When I stepped outside, the cold morning air hit me so hard I almost felt dizzy. I didn't look back at the building. I didn't want to. I got into the first car I could call and told the driver to just go anywhere else. I didn't care where. It wasn't until I was halfway across town that my breathing finally started to calm down. I kept replaying the call in my head. The voice, the questions, the tone. Every time I thought about it, my chest tightened. If I hadn't locked that extra latch out of habit, I probably wouldn't have known anything was wrong until someone was actually inside the room with me. That stupid little metal latch, that thin chain I almost ignored, was the only reason I walked out of that motel on my own terms. I've stayed in a lot of places while traveling, some worse than this one, but I never forgot that night. The damp blankets, the buzzing hallway lights, that slow voice on the phone asking if I was sure, really sure, that I was alone. I always used the latch now. Always. Even in nice hotels. even in places that feel completely safe. Because the scariest part of that night wasn't the call itself. It was knowing that someone, somewhere in that building, was checking for people who weren't protected well enough. And if I had been tired enough to skip that one small lock, I might have become one of the rooms they didn't need to call again. And the worst part is this: they never found out who made those calls. No one ever admitted to it. No one ever reported it. Whoever it was, they knew exactly how to stay hidden. I left that motel behind, but I still think about how easily that night could have gone another way. How close I came to waking up to something much worse than a ringing phone. And how a single small habit, something I did without thinking, was the only thing standing between me and whatever they were planning. I've had my share of weird travel moments, but nothing sticks in my mind like the night I spent in a small roadside motel off a forgotten highway. It wasn't supposed to be a special night. I wasn't running from anything, I wasn't chasing anything, and I wasn't even in a bad mood. I just needed a place to sleep because I had been on the road for almost 12 hours with nothing but gas station snacks and cheap coffee to keep me going. My back hurt, my eyes stung, and my head felt heavy. I wanted a room, a bed, a shower, and silence. That's it. But the motel I picked ended up giving me everything except silence. The building sat alone on a flat stretch of land, surrounded by tall dead grass that swayed in the wind like thin brown hands. There were no other cars in the lot when I pulled in, which made me think the motel might be closed, but the neon sign still glowed red. Vacancy. The office door was unlocked. The front desk area had old tile floors, faded postcards on a bulletin board, and a bowl of mints so stale that they looked fossilized. I checked in quickly and got a key card with peeling plastic edges. The owner looked tired and barely lifted his eyes from the small TV behind the desk. He seemed like a man who had long stopped caring about the place. My room was near the end of the hall on the first floor. The hallway smelled like wet carpet and something old, like leftover cigarette smoke trapped in the walls from years ago. The lights overhead flickered softly, never fully shutting off but never staying steady either. When I unlocked my door and stepped into the room, the first thing I noticed was the strange coldness. Not the kind that comes from air conditioning, more like the air itself had been sitting still for too long. The room was simple. Bed, nightstand, small table, old TV mounted on the wall, and a big window with heavy curtains that looked like they hadn't been washed in years. The bathroom light flickered when I turned it on, and the fan rattled the whole time. The bedspread had a pattern that looked like it belonged in the 80s, with worn spots that felt almost thin enough to tear with a finger. Still, everything looked clean enough for one night. I was too tired to care about anything else. I took a long shower, threw my clothes over a chair, and collapsed on the bed. My body felt like it melted into the mattress. I don't even remember closing my eyes. The exhaustion took over instantly. I must have fallen asleep within seconds. But I wasn't asleep long. A sound woke me, not loud, but sharp enough to pull me out of the heavy fog of sleep. It was a click like metal touching metal. At first, I thought maybe I imagined it. The room was pitch black except for a faint glow leaking through the curtains. I lay still, breathing slowly, waiting to see if the noise came again. It did. Another click, then another, too consistent to be an accidental sound. It was coming from the door, specifically from the lock. It sounded like someone testing it from the outside, lightly touching it, trying to move it without making noise. The sound made my stomach twist. I stayed perfectly still, staring at the door even though I couldn't really see it in the darkness. Then the handle moved. Not violently, not even loudly, just a small, controlled movement like someone pressing it down only halfway. Like they wanted to open it slowly, quietly. The metal latch held tight, thank God, but the handle trembled a bit, then stopped. I listened hard, holding my breath. I could hear the faintest rustling outside my door. Soft footsteps, slow, careful, moving just enough that I knew someone was definitely out there. I waited for something else. A knock, another attempt, anything. But the hallway went completely silent. Too silent. The kind of silence where you can feel someone standing still, waiting for you to move. I stayed awake for what felt like an hour, but it was probably 10 minutes. Eventually, I convinced myself that maybe it was a drunk guest trying the wrong door. Motels get all kinds of people. I tried to shrug it off and go back to sleep. But as soon as I started to drift, I heard something else. A faint scraping noise outside the window. Slow, steady, like something sliding along the glass. My eyes shot open instantly. My heart thudded in my chest. I stared at the curtains, afraid to move even an inch. The scraping continued as if someone was dragging a finger or an object along the outside of the window. The room was on the ground floor. Anyone could have been out there. After a few seconds, the scraping stopped. Then I heard a soft thump, like someone gently pressing the palm of their hand against the glass. I could hear the vibration of it. Then another thump. Then silence again. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the window, waiting for something worse. But instead, everything went quiet again. I stayed like that for a long time, barely blinking, barely breathing. My body felt stiff from fear. I thought about grabbing my things and leaving, but I didn't want to make noise. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I decided to wait until morning, when it would be daylight and other people might be around. The hours dragged by slowly. Every now and then I heard faint sounds in the hallway, like someone walking slowly, pausing, then walking again. At one point, around maybe 3 or 4 a.m., the room got colder, and the heater switched on with a loud clang that almost made me jump out of my skin. I barely slept. My eyes would close for a second, then snap open again at the smallest sound. When the sun finally started lighting up the sky, I felt a wave of relief. I waited until I heard a car outside and figured it was safe enough to move. I got dressed, packed everything quickly, and opened the door just a crack to peek out. The hallway was empty. The carpets looked darker in the daylight, like they were permanently damp. I stepped outside and locked the door behind me. As I turned to head toward the front desk, something caught my eye. The window of my room, right where I heard the scraping, had faint smudge marks along the bottom edge. Not fingerprints exactly, but smears, like someone had pressed something against the glass and dragged it slowly. I felt my stomach clench. I hurried to the front desk. The owner was there, staring at the same small TV. He looked at me quickly, then looked away, like he didn't want to make conversation. I handed him the key and stepped outside without saying anything. I didn't trust my voice anyway. My heart was still racing. As I got into my car, I noticed something else I hadn't seen the night before. On the far side of the motel, near the back rooms, there were 2 broken window frames stacked behind the dumpsters. Glass gone, frames bent. It looked like someone had removed them recently. Next to them was an old metal tool bag, half open, with a long screwdriver sticking out. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to imagine someone walking around at night with tools, trying windows, checking locks, moving quietly up and down the hall. I didn't want to think about what could have happened if I hadn't latched the deadbolt or if I had slept a little deeper. The truth is simple. Someone was trying to get into rooms that night. They were testing doors and windows. They tested mine. Maybe they thought the place was empty because the parking lot was bare. Maybe they didn't expect anyone to lock the extra latch. Maybe they got into another room. I'll never know. But the ending is clear. I left as soon as I could. I drove until I reached a crowded gas station and sat there for a while just breathing, letting the tension drain out of me. I kept thinking about that soft clicking on the door, the slow scraping on the window, and the idea that someone stood inches away from me while I slept. Someone who was ready to enter a room without permission, without hesitation. And the part that still gets me is how close I was to never waking up in time. How one small latch, one tiny piece of metal, kept a stranger out. That night taught me something important. Sometimes the scariest things on the road aren't ghosts or monsters or anything you can't explain. Sometimes the scariest thing is a real person who wants something from you in the middle of the night. Someone who waits for the silence, tests the darkness, and hopes you stay asleep. I'll never forget that room. I'll never forget that clicking lock or that scraping window. And I'll never again stay in a motel without checking the door twice, the window 3 times, and the hallway before I sleep. Because you never really know who else is awake in the darkness. And you never know what they're trying to get into.